live, but we are now streaming. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone here on Zoom and streaming on Facebook or Vimeo or wherever you may be, or perhaps watching a recording. I am delighted to have you join us for our latest Mussar gathering as we're looking to see what we can learn from Jewish wisdom to help us cope with this pandemic. Today is the beginning of our second cycle. We have gone through the 13 soul traits that I covered in my book, The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions. And then when we're done, we took a week to kind of review and consolidate. And now today we are getting started with the second round, which I will talk about in a couple minutes. But everyone is welcome. You don't need to have any background. You don't need to do any preparation before you come. So I'm just delighted that everyone has taken a couple of minutes to be here. And we shall begin, as we always do, with a short meditation. So I invite you to just close your eyes and relax wherever you may be. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And again, inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And as you go at your own pace, if thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them go. Like watching a car go past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema, and on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, friends, as I was saying before, today we are beginning our second round. We started all the way back in March, just when we started to shut down. And really, it was a pretty spontaneous get-together. And very quickly, the next week, we just started a regular, let's meet every week. Let's see how Mussar can help us come together as a community and give us some tools to cope with the pandemic. I did, if you're not on my email list, I send out an email every Tuesday, kind of helping prepare for this. And then we get together on Thursday. And I did take a 6 weeks pause in there for a bit of a mental health break a couple weeks after my mother passed away. And that was really important and helpful to me. And I'm so appreciative to everyone in the community for all your support through that time. So now, as we begin our second cycle, the format is really the same. It's drop-in. You can come as often as you like. This time, however, we're going to be doing 2 weeks per soul trait instead of 1 week per soul trait. And while we'll continue to meet weekly, I'm only going to send out an email at the start of the first soul trait. as school starts for me, I need to kind of save some of that bandwidth. So for my studies, just to be completely transparent. But there are weekly reminder emails that come out every Thursday. And I think this will be nice to be able to go a little bit more in depth, and we'll be able to look at 2 themes for each soul trade. And I think it should give us a little bit more time, especially in the second week, to spend together with our study partners. Okay, so getting started, we'll be getting started with the soul trade of humility. Any questions so far? Okay, very good.
I kind of started last week though.
Cool.
Because I read the chapter and I did some journaling about it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joanne.
And
well,
I have
great.
have some stickies around the house that says neither too much, that's the mantra, neither too much or too little.
What?
Occupy rightful space.
Neither too much nor too little. Excellent. Well, that's great. I mean, humility is such a fundamental part of our Mussar journey. We're all the stars of our own story, so you can never get started on it too soon. Just to remind all of us, or those of us who may be new, that in a Mussar practice, there's kind of 3 phases, which Joanne was just alluding to 2 of them. One is beginning with a mantra or some kind of recitation phrase, where if we have it on a sticky or on a card, we can meditate on it, which frames the day. And then we try to pick one small act, one small part of our life that we'll focus on to make a change and to help us move towards balance. And then we're invited to do journaling, to write down where the soul trade has come up, how we've been challenged during the day, and how we've met it. Sometimes we get it right, other times we see room for improvement. But it's a great way to kind of consolidate the journey and the changes that we're making. Not everybody journals. My journaling practice kind of comes and goes, but when I do journal, it really is very meaningful to me, and I'm always happy that I do it. So today we're going to kick our discussion off talking about boundaries. That was the theme in the email, where a friend of mine was telling me how they kept setting various boundaries in situations, and they were really helpful. And I realized that I kind of got really stressed out over the weekend because I'd set some boundaries and somebody didn't honor that. And so for me, I was very challenged in sort of how I showed up and how I reacted to somebody not respecting my boundaries. So to get started, I'd love, you're invited to unmute yourself. And for you in your own life, are you the type of person who kind of sets too many boundaries, or maybe too few boundaries? I'll stop to share while we discuss this.
Too few.
Okay.
Yeah. Trying to get better at it though.
I tend to either set them way out there or way too close. I'm having trouble finding a middle ground. Boundaries should be here, so I don't have to deal with it when it gets here. It's way out there, or I don't set any at all and crash.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, Pat.
So I just set one right now by raising my hand and creating clarity about when to speak. So I think that I discovered, and I read the chapter that you referred to in the email that you wrote of your book, which was helpful. I think I fall too far in some areas of my life and not enough. I'm too present in some areas, and my boundaries are pretty firm in some ways, but not firm enough in others. So that's my reality.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You and Carol both mentioned that, and I can certainly relate to that as well. Other people care to share on this topic. And by the way, thank you for raising your hand, Pat, but that's not always necessary. And when I'm sharing the screen, I won't see it if someone puts their hand up. So I'm often okay with people just, if it's quiet and I ask for feedback just to give it. But now I am seeing everybody, and I see Janet has her hand up. So
yeah, I set a boundary today. My husband and his daughter, she's my stepdaughter, frequently get into long conversations about her work, the corporate world, and money and things like that. And I said today, if you're going to go on a walk with your daughter, which is fine, if that's what you're going to talk about, I think it's better that I not be there because I can't really participate.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great boundary. Yeah, thank you. David?
Yeah, I think within this pandemic, when it comes to how much risk I want to take in certain situations to do certain things, those boundaries are playing up all the time. Whether it's, being able to spend time with my grandchildren or not, depending on what they're doing, or participating in golf, or doing certain things, or going certain places. So those boundaries are sort of always changing in some way, based upon sometimes science and sometimes intuition and sometimes nothing at all.
Thank you, David.
Let's see.
Yeah, Joanne?
Yeah, when I started journaling, I was writing about space, and I came up with like 3 kinds of space, like physical space, psychic space, and psychological space. Because at one point in my life, when I was married, my ex was very verbally abusive to me, and I had to withdraw from that to survive, because it encroached on my psychological space and peace of mind. But the other thing is I'm very short, and I've had the experience of being on Wall Street when I went to graduate school. Was extraordinarily crowded, and people just didn't see me, and they'd crash into me with their briefcases, and it was just awful. And now I guess I don't want to be in any crowded space. And also, it's like if people are coming down the street without a mask, and I wait to see if they're going to put on a mask, and then I move out of the way because I don't want to be infected, if that's possible. And I guess I'm trying to be more self-protective of my space, and feeling like I'm entitled to that. And I just think that people who decided they don't want to wear a mask anymore are kind of arrogant. I don't care what the people, or the other people.
Yeah, so I think, thank you, Joanne. And there's a couple of points there, and one that I particularly resonate, as we get to choose our own boundaries, and we get to set where our own space is. And that doesn't mean we always make the right decision. We might, like for us, we might say this is like the right amount of space, but to like the rest of the world, it looks like we're taking up this much space, And so that's the challenge. And that's one of the ways that a Mussar practice can help us, because it can give us some guideposts where some of the teachings from the sages and from the holy books can kind of give us some guidelines to say, well, according to this source, this is kind of how you should be measuring it. And that may or may not be the way that I've been approaching it. All right, so let's dig in a little bit more here. I'm going to share my screen once again. And as as also is our custom, every time when we start with a soul trait, we'll start with one of the 4 assumptions for our Mussar practice. These are very helpful for those of us who may not have a big background in Jewish teachings or in Mussar, and don't have years to invest to learn this, or we're all learning as we go. But these are a healthy way to frame a number of the issues. And a very important place to start is this idea is that we all share the same soul traits, but we have a unique measure of each. And so we just finished this cycle of 13. There are dozens and dozens of soul traits that are out there. We just, I just picked these 13 for us to work on, but there's lots of others, like compassion, for example, very important soul trait, not one that we cover. But it's really important to remember again that we have a measure of these. And one of the things which we've discussed a number of times, but if you're new, is that having too much of the soul trait can be just as bad as having not enough. I know a few people, when they were talking about boundaries, they were like, well, I'm either like really close or like in the next country. It's very hard to kind of find that middle place. And that's a sign, that can be a sign that we're out of balance if we sort of find ourselves at the extremes, either too much or too little, and finding a way to kind of come towards balance. And I think it can also really help us if we're being judgmental, like if we're saying, oh, so-and-so is not wearing a mask, and I wonder what their problem is, and I wonder if this means this, that, and the other. Just sort of remembering their humanity and looking at them as like maybe there's something that's, out of balance for them, which is leading to this behavior. Or maybe there's something out of balance for me, which is leading me to judge this behavior in some way, which maybe won't be, where from another perspective, what they're doing is okay. So before we move on, I just want to pause here for comments, either from what you've heard today or from your experience. How do you think it's important to kind of remember that we all share these some soul traits? Is there something that doesn't fit well with you for this idea?
It helps me to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially now. And I don't want to highlight the whole mask issue. I myself wear them when I'm out. I'm at risk. So, but even when I'm driving, and if somebody seems to make a rude decision about their driving, I can't know what that person's going through. So to remember that each of us is different, it just helps me to keep from, number one, getting frustrated, because I can't control people anyway. But the other thing is just, it's kinder.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Linda, you're on mute.
I appreciate the reminders and find that in my personal life, my social circle, it's easier to make myself, when I get into judgment, and let go, but I don't seem to have that capacity when I'm reading national news, and I won't political, but I don't even try to contain myself. And I don't know if I'm even motivated to try to rein myself in, since it's just myself that I'm talking to, or the person I live with.
Well, that's an interesting, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think, a lot of people can relate to that. And so the question is, why might we want to rein ourselves in? If we just let ourselves go, freely, you know, even if it's just for ourselves, is that, you know, a healthy thing to do? Is there a benefit to maybe setting a boundary towards how much news we watch or how much we react to certain events? And again, some of the research that I've read, for example, is if we get into a pattern of getting like really, really angry, like people used to think venting was a good idea, and then someone finally figured out that venting is a terrible idea because it just sets up neural patterns of anger that get reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And so I think, again, it's a, you know, decision that we can make, you know, for ourselves. Like, is this something that's healthy and good for me to do? And that's a decision that you know, again, that's on an individual basis.
Well, I used to think that because I was previously depressed, that getting angry is good because it means I'm not depressed, I'm expressing whatever it was that was upsetting me. But I realized also that that's not very useful in real life. And it's actually very bad for personal relationships. You know, it just really, and it's not good for me. So except when I'm in my car and the windows are closed and I'm upset by what somebody did, I'll say, you know, whatever, you know, and then I'll say, sorry, Hashem, because Lashon Hara, I don't want to do that, really. But, you know, but sometimes I feel better expressing it, as long as nobody hears it. But I think it's really not good. Hold on.
So that's an important point. It is like, when we express things to other people, it can cause additional harm to others. And also, I think it's important to remember that anger is also a soul trait. You know, we are never told never to get angry. You know, it doesn't say don't get angry. It is, you know, and anger is very appropriate in some cases. You know, you look at certain social justice situations and some people will say, wow, how can you not get angry about that? You know, but it's how does it, you know, how do we deal with it? You know, how do we act according to that? John, I see you wanted to add something?
Yeah. Sometimes I used to have, I've gotten better at dealing with the frustrations of, you know, the other day I was in the pharmacy line trying to pick up a prescription, and the person ahead of me was just being very slow at everything they were doing. And I could feel that frustration welling up. But I'll remind myself, you know, in the grander scheme of things, if this is another 10 minutes, it's not going to make a big difference relative to my whole life that I get home 10 minutes later because this person was slow ahead of me. And I find that helps me to remind myself of the relative amount of time this is taking, you know, and relative to a bigger scale. I don't do as well on the news. I mean, that I tend to perseverate on and you know, get upset about it. But I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm. I tell you, one of my big things during my 6-week sort of mental health break is I went on almost a complete news blackout. And boy, it really was, you know, especially for me during that time, that was an appropriate boundary. You know, I don't think that's, for me, that would not be an appropriate way to live my life forever. But, you know, for a time, that was very helpful. And I still do that. I started doing that on Shabbat you know, last year, and that really makes for a much nicer Shabbat, not to watch the news.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's take a peek and see what is next. Can you see the slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so here's our spectrum of humility, again, to this idea that having too little can be as bad as having too much. Too little humility is kind of in line with what we would often think about, where, you know, being arrogant can be very destructive, you know, speaking personally from my own younger days when I was extremely, arrogant and full of myself for all of my degrees and accomplishments. But having too much humility and being sort of self-debasing and not taking care of oneself. And I would tend to kind of go towards those extremes as well. So today we're kind of focusing a little bit on boundaries. And so I think the next slide. Yeah, so there's a couple of ideas here, a few different quotes that relate to boundaries and humility. So rather than me pick one, maybe someone could sort of pick one of these and read it and tell us why that's important to them and their own journey.
I like to pick the second one, if I may, Greg.
Yeah, please do.
The man who told his son he needed career goals. This reminds me of my childhood growing up, where I was told by both my mother and father that I was only to be an artist. And I find that such a projection. I learned over time that was their goal, that was their dream, and that my need was not being met. They were not being very curious about what I liked and didn't like about the art. Art was actually very, very easy for me. There was no challenge to it. So with time, what I learned was I knew that I was more interested in how the art became art. And that journey took me more to psychology. And that's where I became and took more training in neuropsychology. So it taught me a lot about projection, my growing up, that area. So that was actually very helpful to recognize when I hear other people say and point the finger at others and say, you need to do this. Well, they're talking about themselves quite often. Maybe what they were missing. So I find that's a good teaching around boundaries.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Wendy. And what I'm hearing you say is that for you, you need to set your own boundary. If it's like, hey, mom and dad, that's great. That's your dream. But my, career goals are different. And I'm going to go in a different direction. And that's how I'm going to occupy my space. And that's how I'm going to make decisions about my own life. Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm a tantrum. I like the Hillel quotation. But it is sort of about being balanced. You have to be for yourself, but you can't be only for yourself. And now is the time, it's like, don't put off either of those things. Because I learned, I guess, the hard way that I had to be a little more proactive in representing my interests, and had to read the fine print, so to speak, to find out that I could do something that I kept getting rejected by my manager about this program. And then I read that, because she kept saying, well, you don't have this experience. You're not supposed to. And you can write your own, your own notes on what your experiences are. So I wrote it, and then I got into this program that I wanted to be in.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah.
Greg, I'd also like to talk about the same one. This is Pat speaking about Hillel's statement there, so famous. For me, that applies this today, now. I'm realizing it applies to me in the sense of needing an internal boundary that I'm very weak in. And that is, and I'm not, maybe you can help me pinpoint what it is. I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that I'm a doer to such a degree that that I know that I need to stop, do the deep breaths, meditate a little bit, and then journal. I need to do that, and I need to make space and time to slow down, to internalize the midot, or the particular one that I'm working on that week. And journaling for me, I think, is going to be key in slowing me down, because every day that stops me and goes, okay, how is it going with this, and this? And so that's a boundary that I'm aware of, that I need, but it's internal.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm totally following you. And I think that, you know, in a sense, all of these boundaries are internal. I mean, Mussar is an internally focused practice. You know, it's like it's exploring our inner world. It's figuring out kind of what we need. And then sometimes we can put like a hard and fast rule in to kind of help us get there, like no work after 7 p.m. You know, when I was a workaholic and I was working 90 hours a week and I decided I needed to stop that, I had to set very specific boundaries. And part of that was a humility issue, because I kept needing like validation from work. I needed like, my self-esteem was dependent on being successful at work and getting feedback from work. So I was constantly like doing and doing and doing, and I needed to set boundaries. And also I needed to kind of set relative priorities. It's like, yeah, work is important, but it's not important as my own health. So it might be if you can flip the script a little bit and sort of elevate like, wow, this journaling is more important than this other thing that I'm going to do, that might help you sort of saying yes to something as opposed to saying no to something else. I don't know if that helps or not, but does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
So Greg, I just briefly to put highlight on that, because I think that we are living in a society that work is respected. So if you are workaholic and you are kind of addicted to work, you will be respected. So it has 4 components actually, what you get as a workaholic. First, you feel that you have a control over the situation and the environment. Second, you feel powerful, because what you do, you know what you're doing. A third one, when you do something right and people notice it, they will nod at you. You got approval. It feels awesome. And at the end, usually you got paid. Very addictive thing. So if you think that's why it's so much easier to get along at work and do the stuff, because clear direction. But when you come home, well, you know what, you can imagine how much power we have with our spouses, how much control, how much approval we are getting, and not being paid.
Yeah, my teenage children and my toddlers or whoever, or the empty house. I mean, there's a lot of ways. Thank you, Yanis. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good perspective. I appreciate that too. Thank you.
You know, the Hillel quote, as far as it goes to humility. So how much space we take up in any situation right now, right? Because that's a decision that changes with every situation that we're in, of how much space that we ought to take. And it's always now that we have to make those decisions. So for myself, for somebody else, for anything else. And I think that fits in. That's how I'm think about it for as far as humility.
Thank you, David. John, did I see you with a earlier?
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts here. I mean, one on the Hillel quote, I've seen a different translation of that, where instead of who am I, it's what am I? And it's almost making a distinction between, if I'm not for myself, who am I? But if I'm only for myself, what am I at that point? And it's a stark contrast. The last one I was thinking about, I was reflecting on it as we were looking at this, and that has a meaning to me. The person's prayer is not heard unless he makes his heart like flesh. At least to me, what I heard here were two things that came to mind. I mean, I converted to Judaism, so I have a different background. And when I was still going to church, I had this thought one time, you know, we would stand and say the creeds, and I had this thought like, what does this mean? Why am I saying this? You know, I've been saying it by rote for years without ever reflecting on the actual words. And then the other thought I had, which I tied together with this, is a little story from the Baal Shem Tov, when he was going to a synagogue and he stops at the door and he can't enter. He's around to leave, and his followers say, well, what are you doing? Why are you leaving? And he says, too many prayers. And they said, but is it a good thing? And he goes, no, they're trapped in the building. They're not going to heaven. And that's me, because that's that kind of my own experience of reciting things by rote without reflecting on them. Well, metaphorically, the prayer is not going to heaven because they're just kind of stuck in your head.
Thank you, John. Well, I'm going to transition us now to our, so let's see, that's what's going on here. Okay. I want to transition us to our discussion. So the way we'll do this is when you get together, you know, check in with, you know, how you're doing. And also when you're thinking about like coping with the pandemic or coping with what's going on, maybe what's one boundary that you could add or subtract from your life? So let's see, I'm going to start setting up the breakout rooms. We can start to percolate on that idea. Okay, so the way this works, if you're new to this, is you should see something coming up on your screen with an invitation to join a breakout room. If you get to a room and someone's not there, just hang out. I'll move you to another room if for some reason there's only one person. So, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. The rooms are open. So please click on the screen. I'm gonna pause the. Okay, I had paused the recording on me. There's gonna be about 30 seconds till people come back in. So I'm gonna pause it again for a second. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. How was your breakout experience? I'm eager to know.
Great. It was too short.
Oh.
Very short. It seemed like went by like.
We didn't have a warning.
You didn't? Okay.
At least I didn't notice a warning.
I saw 12
I
seconds.
did. I had the 60-second warning.
Yeah, we did.
Well, it's like life. Things can change on a dime in an instant. You never know. Today could be your last. This minute could be your last one to share. So you want to make the most of that. But who would like to be brave and sort of tell us maybe a boundary that they would like to add or subtract from their life to maybe help cope a little better with the pandemic or with what's going on in life now?
I just said social distancing, like, but we could still be, you know, I feel comfortable. We were talking about what we would feel comfortable in a space, you know, with social distancing and masks. And I went to the Botanic Gardens and in the Bronx, and, you know, they were letting people in, only a few people at a time, and you had to pre-register, and it was beautiful. And I felt very safe there. So that was
maybe removing an isolation boundary, allowing yourself to go into some more public spaces under the right circumstances. Wonderful. Thank you, Joanne.
Nancy helped me remind me that I do need to reconnect with a couple people, definitely from my past, open up my boundary. And that was very, very, I was grateful for that. That validated Oh, thank you for that, Nancy.
Yeah, I didn't realize, I mean, it's hard to really define what a boundary is. And Wendy helped me understand what my boundaries are. And recently I've been totally open. I have trouble setting boundaries for myself, like, because I always want to be there for somebody. So I say, I can't, it's hard for me to say, look, I can't talk anymore. I need to do something. But what I've done is I've opened up a whole new world to me by reaching out to some people from my past, and they've now accepted my invitation, and that is just mind-blowing. And I've done a lot of purging recently. If any of you know the Marie Kondo book, I'm kind of doing that, but on my own. And I've been so free. And when Wendy was like, you're setting a boundary for yourself by making your house the way you want it. And I didn't think that was a boundary, but and then letting my son go. And that's been a huge thing. And I didn't think that was a boundary either, but he has to be on his own now. So these are so helpful, Greg. I just thank you.
Well, you're doing great work, Nancy. You're the one doing the work. So it's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. That's inspirational for me, and I'm sure for many others to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, I have one. It's very short. It helps me. I know it's semantics, but I use physical distancing instead of social distancing. I've replaced the word social with physical just because it's less isolating in my little brain.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. I was like, what sort of evil genius decided social distancing is what we need?
Right.
We don't need to be socially distant from people. We need to be physically distant. Yes, I love it.
It's a better way of expressing it.
Yeah.
You know, I do find that the physical distancing over time becomes wearing and more challenging. And we are being pretty strict, but when I see these stories about, you know, thousands of people at the beach or something like, I can identify with that, even though I think it's irresponsible. I have impulse of wanting to get back out into the world, and I have to apply myself to, you know, keeping the regimen of physically distancing from other people and you know, isolating to some extent, physically isolating in our home and stuff like that. But it's a challenge to sustain that now for months, and we might have more months to go.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I really feel that too. My school is restarting on Sunday, and it's supposed to be one of the 3 mandatory in-person gatherings, and we're meeting by Zoom, and you know, we'll do things, but I just feel almost like a physical ache. You know, it's a really like close group, and it's like you know, you hug 50 people in over the course of a day, and so instead I'll hug 0, you know, or my wife, you know, 1, or you know, certainly not my teenage daughter. That is not happening, you know. But it's just, it is, I do feel that longing to be around other people, and that is where, you know, these mental disciplines, you know, really come into place. Where that physical distance is an important boundary, and yet we don't need to be socially distant, especially if, you know, as a couple of people have shared, from like friends from our past. Yeah. Anyone else like to add something or share their perspective? Anyone we haven't heard from yet today? Okay, well, let's, I will start sharing my screen again. So this is something we hadn't been done as much of last time, but it's something I'm going to see if we can add in. And that's to talk about next steps a little bit, to sort of remind us, you know, for opportunities to carry forward over these 2 weeks. And one thing to do is to write down the mantra. So you don't have to use this one. You could use a different mantra if you don't have a piece of paper now. It's something, it could be on a sticky note. You could make a screensaver. For humility, I really like no more than my place, not less than my space, because it really, I think it can apply to almost every topic we've talked about today, whether it has to do with boundaries or whether it has to do with arrogance or our own self-importance. And Joanne talked about different dimensions of this. So putting that somewhere where you can see it in the morning or get reminded of it throughout the day can just help bring yourself, back to being aware of your choices and decisions. And so then the next thing is to pick an action. Pick one thing you're going to do a little bit differently for the next week or 2 weeks. A lot about, you can sort of tell where someone's humility balance is. Part of it can be who always wants to be the first one to kind of speak up. And other people are more reticent. And they're like, I don't really want to share. Or I don't want to, and there's no right or wrong in either of those choices. But one thing we can do is we can say, I'm going to try to, if I'm the really quiet one, maybe I'll try to speak up a little bit more. Maybe I'll send an email after the meeting, or I will, speak to this person a little bit more who I feel safe with. Either to set a boundary, or it's someone gave an example, I'm constantly giving to other people. And sometimes, I need to speak my truth. It's like, hey, I'm giving a little bit too much. Changing where we sit or dress, engaging in self-care. My driving is way down, but parking, trying to really nail it exactly between the lines on the parking space for me is a great mindfulness exercise. And I find that if I'm paying attention really carefully to how I'm parking, it tends to spill over into other areas of my life. And by noticing those boundaries, it helps me notice other boundaries. And then the third part is to give journaling a try. You could do that right after this call, to just either on your phone or on a piece of paper, just write down a few thoughts. So would anyone care to share maybe something that they're going to work on for the next week or two as we do humility? Did these inspire you to kind of think about one area of your life where you want to make a tweak?
I guess self-care. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I exercise even before. When it wasn't too hot, I was getting outdoors, but then it got too hot. So now I've put on some DVDs, and I have a goal to be healthier and lose a few pounds. Very hard. I want comfort food, I want pasta and pizza and ice cream, but not healthy.
Okay.
I'm trying to work on that.
Yeah, my advice is one micro action. No eating between 3 and 5, or I'm going to cut back on X number of treats a week or something.
Right.
Something so small you can't fail. Carol.
I noticed the last thing was sing. Now, I'm a person that used to sing all the time. And I have noticed lately, I hardly ever sing anymore. And I know that when I don't sing, of course, I'm usually not walking around or driving in the car either, which is one of the places I sing. But I used to sit and play guitar and sing, and I never do it anymore. And I think maybe, I sing when I have a Zoom meeting with my choir. And that's about it lately. I think maybe I have to at least carve out one other day when I put that in, because I think it's probably a really important self-care thing to me. I've noticed I have had no desire lately to be creative, to write poetry, which I sometimes do quite a lot, or to sing or play the guitar, which is, now that I think of it, a little bit odd.
Well, Rev Nachman of Breslov said that singing is the best way to connect with the divine. It puts us in touch with our deepest emotions and can put us in touch with the universe. And so, if we're too, if we're too closed off, singing can be a great way to kind of connect to that sort of creativity and joy and other things.
It also said that a prayer sung is a prayer prayed twice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
One thing I really like, I'm musical, and one thing we really miss is going to synagogue on Friday night. We turn on the synagogue service on Friday night, but we're eating. We try to sing along here and there between bites, but I find that the singing experience during the services is really healing for us. And we do make a point of setting the different table on Shabbat.
Thank you, Janet.
I do that. Yeah.
Linda, were you going to say something? So you need to unmute. There you go.
I just wanted to tell Carol that I share what you said. I really understand it, and I'm finding the same experience, that my creativity is just inaccessible, napping something, and I have to talk myself into doing things that I used to delight in doing.
I need to sing to the muse, I think. Come out.
Yeah. Harry, I haven't heard from you today. If you don't mind, I'm just curious if you have a take on anything we've talked about. I want to say hello. I'm not putting you on the spot too much, which I probably am a little bit.
Yeah, this is my first session, so I just wanted to, listen, and I enjoyed meeting Pat in the room, which was nice. It was interesting that you can actually do that on Zoom. Never saw that before. So I just thought it was a very nice program, and I do appreciate being part of it. And
I'm so glad you joined us. Thank you.
Yeah, you're quite welcome.
Would anyone else care to share something before we do our closing meditation?
Well, I'd love to respond to Harry because he mentioned my name. So I enjoyed meeting with Harry too. And I'm a first timer. So yeah, I'll be back. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Well, it's wonderful to have you both here, and bring some friends too. All are welcome. Well, I've one thing that I heard and that I started doing earlier in the summer, especially during my 6-week sabbatical, is I would call somebody every day at 4 p.m, and it was a lot of old friends. And as I've gotten busier, I've kind of fallen off that a little bit. But I think for my next couple of weeks, I'm going to focus on trying to at least call 2 or 3 people during the week. I don't know if I can do it every day, but really to try to, these connections that I started to reestablish, I want to keep them fresh and going. So I think that's going to be my boundary action. All right, so let's all once again close our eyes and relax. And taking a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. Imagining a golden light around yourself that represents your space. And as you go through the world, sometimes it gets a little bigger and sometimes it gets a little strong, it gets a little smaller. But just feel the comfort and security of owning your space. and being okay with it, whatever that might look like for you. Imagine yourself walking confidently, smiling and looking and seeing the world, both as it is and as it could be. And knowing that when you have agency, when you're firmly sitting in your own space, that you can help make the world the way you'd like it to be. Now tilt your head back and smile. And a moment of gratitude for the people in our lives and for this time together in sacred space. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing it.
I'll leave the meeting open for a couple minutes if you want to message anyone, exchange email addresses or phone numbers to continue communication outside of this time.
Thank you, Greg.
Greg.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you,
Thank
Greg.
you.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to say goodbye. I will see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.